Hi.
Hi, well, thank you for coming on to talk about local option tax
Yeah, happy to.
and all the fun things around infrastructure, which directly relates to housing.
Mhm.
So I'm eager to learn from you and just hear more about what you've been doing with your organization over the past many years and what's next for you all. And yeah, how local option tax relates to housing policy. So, for those of you that don't know, local option tax is something the legislature can kind of give localities the power to do. Right now, cities in Idaho cannot do local option tax, it's illegal. And so, cities are pretty limited in terms of what they can do to fund special projects, things that they can't fund with their normal tax base. And so, yeah, tell me about how you started this organization with some partners and
Yeah,
how you initially got into this because I think a lot of people don't really know what local option tax is
sure.
or why it's important.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion around it, and I tell people that I got into this work through luck, which I feel really grateful for. I'm an Idahoan. I always tell people that I'm born, raised, and boomeranged because I left for a while and I came back during the pandemic, and I've worked in the foundation space and with philanthropies, and my background is I studied political science, but I'm really interested just in local impact. And I sort of fell into place where I met with a multifamily housing developer called Roundhouse. So they're a fully integrated developer, meaning they handle everything from the acquisition of properties to the development and into operations. They have properties all over the Mountain West and now actually all over the country. And their CEO is really interested in quality of life. And when they moved their business to Boise, he's a Haley um, longtime resident, born and raised. He wondered why we don't have more effective transportation systems within the city of Boise, went down a big rabbit hole with transportation and transportation policy and infrastructure funding, and found out really quickly that cities are quite hamstrung when it comes to building their own revenue sources. There are really limited ways that cities are able to, and counties are able to do that. So the ones that we're familiar with, of course, are our property tax and then things like expenditure fees, car licenses, driver's licenses, trash, water, the things that we know that we pay for as city residents. But other than that, the state of Idaho is really unique in that it prevents cities and counties from seeking other ways to fund their own projects. So the CEO's name is Casey Lynch. He was really interested in just investigating that problem and found me through sort of a series of fortunate events. And we started this nonprofit together um, a little over 3 years ago now.
Nice.
So it's been an amazing project. We were able to look at decades of precedents in the conversation of local option because it's something that is used pretty ubiquitously outside of Idaho.
Mhm.
And within Idaho, the way that it works is certain communities are able to utilize it. It's only about 12% right now, which is frustrating to the other communities that are functionally barred from utilizing the tool. Um, and so there's about 50 years of political context that I was able to look through and really think, okay, we are at a position where our cities are really desperate, frankly, for new funding mechanisms and new streams of revenue. How can I learn from previous attempts to expand this tool and do something differently? And so what we did was we built out a business coalition. And you realize very quickly that, of course, businesses have an enormous stake in the quality of life in the communities where they do business, where they operate. And so what I found was by really making the connection for these businesses and how quality of life is affected by things like infrastructure funding, like public service availability, and things like housing, they were really eager to be engaged in this conversation of how can we ensure the quality of life for our residents, for our customers, by ensuring that we're investing in growth, investing in existing communities the way that we want to and ensure that we're really protecting and bolstering our quality of life. So I spent 3 years now,
Oh,
traveling the
interesting.
state and talking with business owners and talking with, economic development groups and legislators and elected leaders at the state and the local level, at the city, the county level. I talked to, these big and small businesses, from large corporations like St. Luke's to folks that own gas stations or mom and pop shops, and just concerned citizens. And what I found to be really meaningful and fruitful about the discussions is that, as we all know, Idaho's communities are really diverse, and they have really different needs, whether that's infrastructure needs, public service needs, or just basic sort of ways to support the people and the economies of those regions. And by traveling the state and having these conversations, I was able to really recognize that a tool like a local option, or just really ensuring local control, is really what would be so beneficial for our communities right now, because there's no silver bullet, right? There's no magical toolbox that we can present, the state or whoever can present to our communities and say, here's what you need to fund a water tank project.
Right.
And so these local tools really allow for cities and the residents of communities to make those decisions for themselves. And businesses and various groups are really invested in ensuring that we are successful in expanding access to those tools. So it's been a really incredible body of work that we've been able to put together. And I've had a really great time
Yeah.
learning so much and traveling.
And tell everybody what the name is.
Oh,
Well, I didn't
I
ask
didn't
you.
even work.
I didn't
even
ask
say.
you.
Our organization is called Lift
Lift
Local
Local
Idaho.
Idaho. Cool. And why do you, being from Idaho, I guess personally, you could probably have gotten another job. Why
Yeah.
did you want to take this work on? It's a huge lift, no pun intended.
Yeah, it's not something that I would have expected myself to do. Tax reform work, or municipal finances, is not it's not the sexiest. It's not the
Mhm.
sexiest project. And I love this state, and I think I probably maybe even most Idahoans, maybe even all Idahoans, recognize that our state is changing because of existing needs, because of growth.
Growth.
And I get it. I mean, I think it's really easy to um, I think it's really easy to be a bit nervous about
Mhm.
growth. And I get it. I love my state. I am really protective of my state. But I also recognize that the same reasons that I love it, they're the reasons why people are moving here. And so I
Yeah.
think we need to be really cautious and really proactive about protecting the things that we love. And one of the ways to do that is to invest in our infrastructure, and to invest in our public services, and ensure that people have the tools to be able to make decisions for themselves, instead of just waiting for the state to say
Mhm.
X, Y, or Z.
Right.
And so for me, it's about that. It's about protecting the Idaho that I love,
Yeah.
and ensuring that future generations get to enjoy it as
Making
much as I
sure
did.
it's a wonderful place to live.
Yeah.
Remains a wonderful place to
Yeah.
live. It's obviously, changed so much since we grew up here, but
Yeah. Yeah.
gosh, traffic. Ugh.
Right. And I
Get to
think
hear about traffic all the time, and it's like, well, we don't have all the tools we need to address for that.
we
Right?
don't. And I
Mhm.
think, I've had and like you, we've had the privilege of living in other places across the United States, and getting to travel, and really seeing how, if we don't address these issues early and proactively,
Right.
then we see issues like the traffic in Seattle or the Bay Area or Los Angeles, or a place like Austin, Texas, for example.
Mhm.
And it really doesn't discriminate red or blue. If we're not planning effectively, then we end up with congestion and eroded public infrastructure and services that don't arrive on time. And so I think we have an opportunity, and that I have seen, because I've had the privilege of living elsewhere, that we really have an opportunity in Idaho to make sure that we don't become like those other places.
Completely agree with that. Yeah, and planning, now is the time. We have grown a ton, I think, just in the last several years. I recently heard a statistic that on the most recent voting records, 56% of folks had been in Idaho prior to the 2020 election, which is crazy. So we're kind of unicorns now,
Yeah.
those of us who were born here, which is fine. But I
Yeah.
think just over the last several years. And so now that we have this different population, what does that look like? What do we need to do to, again, keep this a wonderful place to live for everybody?
Yeah. What's interesting about that, I'm so interested in population growth. And something that I find really interesting about the trends that we've seen in Idaho is that it's not just happening in Boise and Meridian and Idaho Falls and Coeur d'Alene and our metropolitan areas. It is happening in the most recent census data that we have shows that population is growing in every single county in Idaho except for one, of all of our counties. So it's not something that is specific to the areas that we think of as being more urban. And with that, we're also seeing a huge increase in tourism, which is our state's third largest industry. And so while we are having these existing growth, these existing challenges as a result of, just aging infrastructure and the need for the diversification of revenue, we also have these compounding and layering issues of growth in how our state is. It's something like the fifth fastest growing state of the century. We have had so much growth here in Idaho across the board, and our tourism is just surging. We have $16 million a day in tourism, direct tourism spending here in Idaho, and 76% of that is coming from out of state visitors. So we have all of these challenges that are sort of layering on top of each other. And right now, our cities and counties don't have the ability to really address the needs that they currently have, let alone the ones that we can forecast. And so I really think that we need to be much more strategic about how we think about those challenges. And one of them is this idea of expanding a local option tax. And so what a local option tax does well for
That was
this,
going to be my next question.
yeah,
What does it do?
what it does is, and what it does well. So the formal name for a local option tax is a non-property local option sales tax. So what that means is it's a temporary sales tax, and it has to be voted on by the residents of the community that will pay it. It is used exclusively for local projects. So that's something like you can think of, infrastructure, public services, things like housing, potentially. What's great about it is because it's a local option sales tax, it is used for projects exclusively that locality needs. So, in my view, it's the most transparent form of taxation because you have an entity, maybe it's a city council, for example, that proposes this to their voters, and they say, we'd like to utilize, they also call it a penny tax or a tourism tax. We'd like to utilize this penny tax, a penny on the dollar on X, Y, and Z. So not only do they decide how long the tax is going to be used for, but they decide what it will be applied to, and the voters get to say yes or no. And so I think that's really great because typically it means that entity, the city council or whoever proposes it, is able to decide for their economy and for their needs how to best collect that tax. And so what they tend to do, and the reason why a local option tax is currently only legal in Idaho's resort communities. So these are communities with fewer than 10,000 people and resort-based economies or recreational-based economies. They are able to say, okay, let's apply this tax to things that tourists are going to be spending money on. So that could be Airbnb, hotel, motel visits. That could be liquor by the drink. That could be outfitters or, just a blanket sales tax. If they want to, they're able to exempt certain things. If they want to, they're able to cap the tax to be applied to things over or only under, $1,000, whatever it is that they want to do. The way that the legislation exists, and again, this is only for those resort communities in Idaho. There's only 23 of them, so everybody else can't use this right now. Those communities are able to decide, let's apply this to the things that tourists pay for. So it makes a lot of sense because in a lot of cities in Idaho, particularly those who are impacted by tourism, they maybe have, in the view of the Idaho legislature, these are communities that are under 10,000 people. You have a place like Sandpoint, for example, which actually is going to age out of their ability to utilize local option tax because they, in the next census, will have more than 10,000 people.
Oh,
But what they do is they
what is that?
apply a local option tax, and it has funded their public safety. It has funded the renovation of their walkway project or their sort of boardwalk project that they've done up there. That's so beautiful. And what they're able to do is recognize that okay, they have 10,000 residents that are tax paying residents. They're paying into the property taxes that go into the city's general fund to pay for things like police contracts, fire, so on and so forth. But you have tens of thousands of visitors, particularly within the summer months, or maybe they're going to ski Schweitzer, what have you. They have thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming into the city every single day. And those people are utilizing the water and the bridges and the roads and the public services like police and
Mm-hmm.
fire and other public safety services. And so by having those people, when they buy a drink, when they buy a ski ticket, when they buy something like, a meal at a restaurant, they're helping fund that public safety in the
Right.
city of Sandpoint. And that's something that other cities in Idaho are not able to do.
Yeah,
And so they end up subsidizing the tourism. So
totally.
by expanding this tool and by making it legal for our cities and counties, it allows them the ability to ask their citizens, if we want to, here's one way that we could harness the tourist dollars coming into our community. So I think it makes a lot of sense to be thinking about expanding it right now. And through my research my conversations over the
Mm-hmm.
past 3 years, we've seen also that cities are really in a dire place, needing new funding
Mm,
mechanisms
definitely heard that.
and they're tapping into something like the dollar spent via tourism is one way that they can ensure that their existing residents, that their property tax paying residents are able to get the ambulances that they need, the police squads that they need, the road repairs, to fill the potholes, all the things you think of as infrastructure. It's a way to ensure the sustainability of their community.
Totally. Um, Thank you for explaining what that is. And yeah, such a great way to explain it, and show the need for it as well. And I see a lot of things. I try to see things from a conservative lens sometimes because we're in Idaho, and
Yeah,
that's how a lot of people think, especially with regards to new taxation. We know this having grown up here, so that's always a big concern for folks. So, how do you address, when somebody might say, well, we don't want to create a new tax. Why can't governments pay this in other ways? Like, I know some governments are trying to use bonds
yeah,
to pay for certain projects.
yeah,
Why can't they just do that? How is this going to affect my food cost, like groceries? Is another
yeah. Of
argument
course,
against it, of
of
course.
course.
So yeah, those are obviously. I know there are a lot of reasons why this hasn't passed in recent years, but
Yeah,
I do think the hesitation to create any new taxes in our legislature has been a big barrier, right?
absolutely.
So how do you address some of those concerns with
Yeah.
folks? I'm sure you get it. You've
Oh,
heard those a
totally.
lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is something
Yeah.
that I think about on an individual level is I'm not interested in making life more expensive
Yeah.
for the average Idahoan. And so, of course, a sales tax is something that is it's an addition to what they're already purchasing. And so I think about this, on the like the political science level, of course, but also on an individual level. I pay these things also. I don't want to be charged more. And I think that there's quite a few ways to look at this where the sort of crux of it is that things are more expensive for us right now because we don't have this,
Right.
because we are subsidizing the tourists that come in. And when I say tourist, I mean I should really use the word visitor because it is tourists from out of state, out of country, but it's also people coming from neighboring communities. So I think
Mhm.
a really good example here is the city of Twin Falls, which has 56,000 people, and they're the economic hub of their region. So people come into Twin Falls. A lot of people live in Twin Falls, right? But
Mhm.
you also have more than twice the amount of people coming into Twin Falls every single day than live there.
Wow.
So they're able to look because it's really interesting because Twin Falls has, with the bridges, specific access points to the city. They're able to know exactly how
Oh,
many
true.
how many cars come into their city on any given day. And they have 56,000 people that live there in, the sort of like peninsula of Twin Falls. And on any given day, between 80 and 110,000 people
Yeah.
come into the city. And so it is more expensive for the people within the tax-paying residents of Twin Falls because they have to subsidize those people coming in.
Mhm.
And if we were able to give the city of Twin Falls something like a local option tax, they would see lower property tax
Lower
bills.
property tax.
And
Mhm.
so the city of Twin Falls, of course, would be able to decide how much what they would like the cap or what they would like the tax to be applied to, if they'd like to cap it, what they would like to see that tax on, to ensure that those residents aren't getting hit twice, which is
Mhm.
what I would advocate for. But it really it's less of an additional sales tax and more of a diversification of revenue streams. So
Mhm.
yes, those people are coming in from, Kimberly, for example, and maybe they're going to the grocery store, maybe they're using the parks or the I don't know, the libraries, churches,
Mhm.
the shopping centers of Twin Falls, but they're also using the water and the roads and the bridges and the public safety services. And so they're really, contributing what I feel is their fair share. And that's something that would be up to the experts in Twin Falls to decide how to make that feel fair. But to me, that is the conservative
Mhm.
approach. And that's just sort of the baseline. When you look at it in the medium and long term, it's also much more politically, excuse me, financially responsible, because if a city is capped on how much they can spend, and of course they are, and that's, there's a lot of political precedents there. In 2021, as you know, the legislature passed House Bill 389, which
Mhm.
basically prevents how much growth can pay for, or yeah, growth can pay for growth in our cities, and that's been really really difficult for our cities because they're only able to capitalize, and harness up to it a
Mhm.
certain percent. And so what you see is cities choosing to utilize something that's called deferred maintenance, which basically means, okay, we can't afford to address this bridge right now. We will, address our immediate needs. And what happens is they kick the can down the road.
Mhm.
And that means projects are way more expensive as time goes on. And so to me, even if we, kick the can down the road and we say we're not spending that money right now, this is the conservative thing to do. To me, that's not the conservative thing to do. That project is going to be, up to 600 times more expensive.
Bridge replacement versus repair.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Which then, okay, are we then having to request money from the federal government at that point if it's an emergency situation? To me, that's not the Idahoan approach, and
Mhm.
it is just cheaper to address issues head on instead of kicking the cost down the road. And that's something that would, so like having different revenue streams would allow for our municipalities to do that. So that's another way that this is, I think,
Mhm.
a pretty, bipartisan approach.
How is it different from bonds? Because we just got through a local election.
Yep.
For those that don't understand, we have seen cities obviously try to use bonds to make up the difference for infrastructure
Yeah.
costs, especially now with House Bill 389 making them causing challenges with basically paying for, firefighters, police, basic things
Yeah.
that must exist when our cities grow. Schools obviously is a big one. We saw a big bond pass in Meridian related to
Hmm.
fire,
Hmm.
funding firefighters and fire stations, and then another big one in Sandpoint Pass to fund some of their water sewer infrastructure, I
Yeah.
believe. So how does that relate? I know a lot of cities try to pass bonds to fund schools.
Yep.
Middleton, Salmon have tried, and recent years. I know Middleton in particular, their community has grown so much. Their schools are very stretched thin, and they can't pass a
Yep.
bond.
Yep.
And so teachers, class sizes, really struggling there. Yeah, can you talk about how it compares to the tool to bond versus local option tax, kind of how those are
Yeah.
different?
Yeah. I think it's a confusing topic because they are so similar,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a lot of overlap in how they function. I think the biggest similarity that they have is that they have to be voted on, which is I think a great thing. I like the oversight and the accountability and the transparency, and I think that's something that most voters would agree on is they like to know how these tax dollars are being spent. And the same thing with a levy, right? So my understanding is that bonds and levies are used also differently than a local option tax would be. A bond tends to be used for harder physical infrastructure projects, whereas a levy might be ongoing operations. What's different about a local option tax is that it allows cities greater or counties, whatever the entity is, more flexibility in how those dollars are used. It's similar in that it's voted on. There is a specific sunset. There's a specific timeline for the projects. But something that is wonderful about the tool of local option tax used in Idaho and also outside of Idaho is that you can use it for varying things. And so I think a really, really great example is the city of Oklahoma City. So they're kind of the quintessential poster child for local option tax success. So following their catastrophic bombings, their downtown corridor was really distraught,
Mm-hmm.
and they were really struggling to revitalize it. And what they did, and what their mayor at the time did, that was pretty gutsy, and now decades later has really paid off, is they said we will give our residents the ability to invest in themselves, and we will. They called it the MAPS project, which is the Metropolitan Area Projects, acronym. And what they did was they applied this penny tax to basically everything that would fall within the sales tax basket. And they said it will be 10% will be used for parks, 10% will be used for public safety. I'm making these numbers up right now, but they had a whole variety of projects,
Mm-hmm.
and they said this money will be used in the next 10 years, or basically like we lose it. And so the people of Oklahoma City chose to say yes, which was, I think, an investment in their own future. And since they've done this in 10-year periods,
Mm-hmm.
they have renewed it 4 times. And over the course of 10 years, Oklahoma City went from a city that was really struggling and was kind of a ghost town. In 10 years, they became the number one city in the United States to start a business.
Wow.
And now you have just just a flooding of public-private partnerships because they were able to build the hard infrastructure for a ballpark and for a new
Mm-hmm.
park. But with that, you have new restaurants popping up around, you have new shops popping up around, and it really revitalized the entire city. And so with that, of course, they had the need for fire and police. They had the need for water projects. They weren't just building a ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
They were building the community that the ballpark would exist in, and that's something that local option really allows for. And so the way that local option tax is used there's 23 cities in Idaho right now, so 12% of our cities um, are able to utilize this tool. They are able to use it specifically for what their community needs, and
Mm-hmm.
they are able to go to their voters and say, with this one-time approval for typically it's a 10-year period, or the period in which their city is doing their planning assessment, essentially, they will say, okay, we want 10% for um, trash services. We want 20% for housing projects. We need most of the time, you see, because public safety is the pretty much across the board the largest part of a
Yeah.
city's budget. It's often used for that. but it's also the things that you don't really think about, like water and wastewater, and the things that we assume that our city or our community will handle for us. When a local option tax is utilized for those things, it allows for I think just greater transparency, and is a really great way for, I think, also the community to really share with their citizens, here's how we want to grow, here's what we know we need, and here's how you can invest, and how our tourists can help pay for that.
So what I'm hearing is compared to bonds, it just allows for, or levies, yeah, which I was using all in one term, which those are two different things. But
It's confusing though.
yeah, I just always say bonds, but that's confusing. But bonds and levies, compared to that, local option is a lot more flexible and allows for cities to meet a variety of needs, where bonds and levies are more specific.
Yeah.
And you can only bond for like one thing at a time, is
Yep.
kind of my understanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So and it again, there's quite a lot of similarities. They have different approval thresholds. They all require specific criteria. So local option is similar to those two in that, they need voter approval. They have a sunset, and they know how much they're asking for. So they're a similar bucket of. I would put them in a similar bucket of tools. And really, what we're trying to do is expand that toolbox. So there are lots of other ways that particularly cities and communities outside of Idaho are able to, expand and use the toolbox that works for the moment, for the project that they need. Another thing that I think that I failed to mention is local option tax can be used for um, ongoing operations,
Mm.
whereas something like I would say an impact fee is another tool that communities have. They're not able to use impact fees for operations.
Yeah.
Local option can be, if they put it in the proposition to their voters.
Right.
So, yeah.
I know a challenge we have in Star is they bonded, they got
Yep.
a fire station built, but now they can't pay for firefighters,
Yeah.
so that fire station is sitting empty.
Yeah,
Right? And they can't use impact fees to pay the firefighters.
This month they had another failed
bond.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
they've been trying for a long time. And I think what's so scary about the growth that we've seen, especially, I mean, Star is a really great example, where you have these firehouses built because of impact fees, and because of the quick growth that they have experienced. And it gives the false, because that building is there, it gives the false sense of security to Star residents that when they need it, an EMT is going to be there in 5 minutes, because the firehouse is 5 minutes from their house. But what they don't know, because there's no operational funding, is that it's not staffed. And so the people that would be serving them are maybe 10, 15 minutes away. And so I think it gets political in a way that it doesn't need to.
Absolutely. I know. Again, it's like that ultra, conservative mindset where it's like, I don't want any new taxes, I don't want anything added. And like you said too, it's understandable. Cost of living is so high right now.
Yeah.
And so folks are feeling really stretched thin in so many different ways, between, the cost of housing and our rising property taxes and all these other things. But it is kind of the cost of growth, unfortunately. We all pay for it somehow.
Yep.
Whether that's with a 2-hour commute, from Caldwell to Boise in the morning, or, if it's on our property tax, which a lot of us are seeing, versus sales tax, somewhere that cost comes in. So, thank you for explaining that so well. So, a couple things, I'm super interested in, obviously, is how local option tax can be used to address our challenges with housing. We know that the lack of infrastructure sometimes causes housing that we need to not get built. And cities are sometimes hesitating now to build housing. You mentioned the challenge of House Bill 389, which is preventing them from taking their full property tax or tax on new construction. So they can't pay for, pipes, sewer, water, trash, all these things that would, essentially allow housing to get built. And So yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that and the link between what folks could do with local option tax with regard to housing. Our
Yeah.
cities that have local option tax have done some really cool projects in Idaho,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think, what I think we have so much overlap between our organizations because housing and infrastructure and public services are just, of course, intrinsically linked. Housing is the thing that housing, I would say, is the infrastructure that touches our lives the most, or it's maybe the one that we're most aware of. But you can't have housing without appropriate infrastructure, right? You can't just build a house and assume that water is going to come to you, or that you're going to have access to a library or to a firehouse, or whatever it might be. So these things are linked. And what we have really seen over the last, couple years in particular, especially since 389, at the same time that that is happening, we've had so much growth, we've had the need for more housing, it's gotten more expensive. More and more people cannot afford to buy a home if they would like to. And to do a little bit of backtracking, so this past year, I ran a survey of our coalition membership, which is statewide. A couple hundred people responded to this survey across every county, across most cities, and we were able to get really great data on infrastructure and housing needs. And one of the questions I asked was, given your current access to tools, so like the suite of tools that a city or a county would have access to, would you be able to ensure the ongoing availability of this quality of life based on the tools that you have? And 94% of my respondents said no. So that's really terrifying to me for a number of reasons, because we're not,
Yeah.
addressing these existing issues that we have. And we know there was a great report out earlier this year, from the American Society for Civil Engineers, and every 5 years they do an assessment of a state's, all 50 states, and I think they do Puerto Rico too, but they do all 50 states, basically provide a report card on their infrastructure. And we saw it was something like $4.5 billion in water needs alone,
Yeah.
right? So that's existing, and
Mhm.
that's not accounting for new subdivisions. That's not accounting for the sprawl that we're seeing right now. And so that's expensive. Like that, a billion with a B
Yeah.
is really
Yeah.
terrifying. But you can't just expand without thinking and planning. And these are projects that take years and years and years and decades at a time. And our organizations both have a priority of allowing for quality of life too.
Mhm.
So you can't just put a subdivision in the middle of nowhere and hope for the best. You have to think about, okay, how many houses am I going to have? What is the property tax valuation? What are the tools that we can get to those residents? Are we able to ensure that we have enough police, enough fire to get to those communities while also serving the communities that we do have? It's very complicated and it's
Mhm.
very expensive. And so all of these things are really going hand in hand. And the access to more tools will allow us to be much more thoughtful about how we go about that planning process, about how we deliver those services, and how we do that in a way that perpetuates the quality of life for Idahoans. And so there are, of course, all kinds of issues on relating to where people want to live, whether they want to live in places where there is existing infrastructure versus maybe they want more acreage, or they want a more rural experience. And so it's really challenging. And you have
Mhm.
places like the city of New Meadows, for example, which is a city of a couple hundred people, and
Mhm.
they are like every other community across the state and across the world, where they have needs and they need
Mhm.
a new water treatment plant. But unlike the city of Boise, for example, that can spread the cost of a water treatment plant across 250,000 people,
Mhm.
that water treatment plant is, very nearly just as expensive in Boise as it is in New Meadows. But instead, they're spreading it across a couple hundred people. And so
And just property taxes.
and property taxes. So
Yeah.
it's an additional, it's a tool that will allow cities, and the expansion of this toolbox allows cities to do that in a more thoughtful way, so people can have homes that they want to have, and they can afford to live in those homes without having a property tax bill that is gargantuan.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about all the water infrastructure and sewer.
Yes.
I've heard in particular is a big challenge for cities and concerns. They don't, have pipes that are wide enough to accommodate, growing needs, and uh, sewer projects are so expensive.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what our cities have to do, because you can't just allow your sewer system to
Right.
implode. And so they're going to have to figure some things out on that. And like you said, there's only so many tools for that. And if they do have to bond for that, it's going to be a big cost to folks who live in those communities.
Right.
I've heard some projects, if they are able to take care of the needs that they need to take care of, will add $200 a month on folks at
Yeah.
property tax, or
Yeah.
depending on how they pass that cost off. But it's it's
Yeah.
going to be hard for Idaho to figure that out in the next several years.
And I think that's a huge misconception people have, is if they vote no on a bond or they vote no on a levy, that okay, now we're not having this. That's not how it works. That money is going to come from somewhere. So it's going to be applied to property tax. It's going to be applied to expenditure fees. And so we're not making our lives cheaper by voting no on these things. We just need more ways for responsibility, and we should have accountability, and we should be able to vote no if we think the project is not the right direction. But with something like a sewer system, we're going to have that.
Yeah.
And that's something that's going to happen. So we need to find the way that's going to be the most responsible, that's going to be the most effective, and the most fair in making sure that happens and is paid for.
But it's got to be paid for somehow.
But it's got to be paid for somehow. And that's
same as those firefighters in Star. They've got to figure that out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, folks are going to not get those critical emergency services they need. And that, that's not okay. So, gosh, there's so many more things to talk about with you. But obviously, so many challenges in advancing local option tax in Idaho over the last decades that you have encountered. And I think you've done a great job with Lift Local Idaho at elevating the conversation of local option tax again, getting folks to think about it again and again, gather around the idea, and building this coalition of businesses that are saying, we need more infrastructure in our city so that our economy can grow, so that our workforce can, stay here, and so that we can, essentially grow our businesses in Idaho. Recognizing that, truly this is a business decision.
Yeah.
And there is a very large business case for Idaho. I think you've done a great job at, building that coalition and getting folks to think about this again over the last 3 years. So I know you have an announcement, sort of, with regard to next steps for Lift Local. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yes, I'm so excited about this. As I've referenced a whole bunch of times during this conversation, we have so much overlap in how our organizations are approaching building the future of the state. And I really think that that's something that you and I also really have in common as Idahoans and as organization leaders, is we're thinking in the long term, and we're thinking about how to ensure that Idahoans are able to make the choices that they need to make to ensure the sustainability, the longevity of their communities. And it really is it's a business decision. It's, what do you want to invest in, and how can our government systems help us get to meet those community needs, in addition to just ensuring that our day to day is as safe and wonderful as it should be as Idahoans, because that's what we, I think, really pride ourselves in and offer other people as they're moving here, is this quality of life.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited that our the new organization, the Gem State Housing Alliance, is going to be absorbing Lift Local Idaho.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited about it for a number of reasons. I think, of course, as we've we could talk about for hours and hours and hours. There's so much overlap in our policy priorities, in how these things actually are executed, and how we need to be thinking in terms of system overlap. But something that I've really learned through the past 3 years of doing this work is our state is we have a lot of really amazing people who care so much about their communities. And what I've really been able to see is you have this deep work happening, but it's kind of happening in silos.
Mm-hmm.
And the problems that Idaho Falls has are not that different than the problems that Coeur d'Alene has. What they're addressing is different, but the way that they're looking at it and the solutions that they need and the tools they need are not that different. And so I've been able to connect folks, from all corners of the state to one another, and built out this coalition of people who are talking and realizing, oh, if we did this, it would help us with this, or how did you address this with the tools that you have, or what did this business think about this? And we've built out this apparatus of relationships that are so powerful and so helpful, and we're able to connect those silos. And housing is another one of those issues that we can really address and best address when we are able to talk about local solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to pass off this network of relationships and the investment that business leaders and citizens have been making in my coalition. And with that, really just together focus on the future for our state and ensuring that it's a livable place for all of us who want to be here and who get to be here.
We're very excited to, take on that work and that coalition. Housing, just like everything else, is, that local option tax can fund truly touches every aspect of life.
Yeah.
And one of our top things in our policy playbook is helping communities address infrastructure challenges. And so I think, that's a huge way we can do this is with local option tax. Otherwise, there's just so many challenges communities are dealing with infrastructure, and especially as we've talked about, as our population has grown, it's going to continue to be a big challenge for Idaho to face down. And so, we're excited to take on the coalition and also the mission that you guys have built over the last few years. So thank you for that, and for helping us get a good, strong foothold as we start this new thing.
Yeah.
We'll have a strong base to build from. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you again for all the work you put into this over the last 3 years.
Thank you.
It's been a big lift. And like I said, I think you guys have got a lot of folks talking about this. And hopefully anybody that's watching or listening today has learned something about local option tax too, if they're not already in the conversation. I think it would be a great thing for Idaho to have in its toolbox, and for locals to have in their toolbox to advocate for the needs that their cities have and have control over, what their cities are investing in. So I think it's an amazing mission, and we're excited to take it on.
Thank you so
hopefully,
much.
hopefully we'll have a chance to talk again, because there's so much more to talk about. We didn't even get into all the different housing projects that different cities have done.
Yes.
But
Local
with
option
local
tax has been
option,
funding housing projects in
yes,
Idaho. It's
it has,
an amazing way to address the critical shortage.
especially for workforce housing, and then
Who are serving tourists, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I know our resort cities have done some really great things with that and continue to. So they've provided a model for what's possible. So we get to, look more at those activities too at some point, so folks can learn about it. But thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you. I'm really excited to keep collaborating.